Jesus is Lord.
God is an all-consuming fire, burning away.
Hello, brothers and sisters. Once again, today I have a little question for you. Have you been told you can lose your salvation? And that's exactly what the book of Hebrews tells you. That if we go on sinning willfully, we could end up being lost forever because there's no more sacrifice for us. Even the sacrifice of Jesus will be useless for us. And when you read verse 26 of Hebrews chapter 10, it literally does say that, right? For if we go on sinning deliberately after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sin. There you go. If you keep sinning when you're a Christian, you can end up going to hell. And then there's no more sacrifice for you. Then it's too late. Jesus' sacrifice can no longer save you. That's what it says. Now this is where we need to step back and remind ourselves of a few rules. A rule like context. We've already talked about how the book of Hebrews is a call to a church going through persecution where many of them are kind of stepping back. Specifically going back to Judaism, right? The sacrificial system. Going back to saying, okay, yeah, the Jesus thing is good, but just in case, I'm going to go keep doing animal sacrifices and shed their blood because I know Yahweh likes that. I'm going to go for the Day of Atonement, which was the day of the year where they did a special sacrifice that covered sins for a whole year, just in case, right? That's what he's talking to. That's the people he's talking to. That's the greater context of the book. Now the chapter also has a context. It starts by talking again about the sacrifice of Christ establishing a covenant. And then motivates us to keep going through that covenant, calls us to come together and stir each other up to keep going in that covenant, in that work of Christ and his blood alone being acceptable before the Father. That's what we saw in the last video. Then he moves on here and says, for if we go on sinning deliberately, after receiving the knowledge of the truth, knowledge of which truth? That Christ is our hope before the Father. There no longer remains a sacrifice for sin, but a fearful expectation of judgment and a fury of fire that will consume the adversary. Anyone who has set aside the law of Moses dies without mercy on the evidence of 2 and 3 witnesses. So now he's just giving an example of the Old Testament and showing that, that there's a certain situation where it's too late for you. Now, it's going to show how this works in the New Covenant. Haha, you see, Martin, there is something for us where we could go too far. Yes, let's read it in verse 29. How much worse punishment do you think will be deserved by the one who has trampled underfoot the Son of God and has profaned the blood of the covenant by which he was sanctified and has outraged the Spirit of grace. Outraged the Spirit of grace, sorry. In other words, the way by which you go too far in this new covenant, it's if you get to a point where you reject Christ as the only way. His blood as the only sacrifice you need to be saved. That's what chapter 10 is about. That's what he keeps pushing people through, that narrow way, which is Jesus himself, his sacrifice on the cross, his blood. And that's the way you trample on the blood, saying, that's not enough. I'm going to go back to animal sacrifices. That's why he says there's no more sacrifice for sin. If you reject this one true sacrifice of Christ as the only way to be accepted by the Father, forget it. There's nothing left for you guys. You can go do as many animal sacrifices as you want. You're done for because you've rejected the one true way by which the Father accepts us. That is the way you could go too far in this new covenant. Actually going away from Jesus as the only way to be accepted by the Father. Not by obedience, not even by gross sins, but by walking away, by denigrating, by seeing as less the sacrifice of Christ. So for those who use this verse to say, haha, you must keep going forward in obedience to be accepted by God, to go to heaven, you're actually being rejected by the very verse you're using. Because this verse is saying, if that's what you're doing, you're the one that's lost. If you're telling people that your obedience will bring you to heaven, then you're actually disqualified by the very verse you're using here. For you, there is no more sacrifice for you. Not even your obedience. Because you've rejected this knowledge of the truth. Christ paid it all. Christ did it all. It's all because of him. Hopefully this is making a bit of sense. Because this is a serious matter. Many people who use this verse and others to prove that you could lose your salvation, in a way, they're actually condemning themselves. Because these are all verses saying, if you try to find another way, like obedience, like faithfulness, you're actually going against that very perfect sacrifice that was given to you once for all. So this is a scary thing. Very scary thing. If anyone shows you this verse and tells you can lose your salvation, read with them the passage. Show them that they're trampling underfoot the blood of Christ as the only true way to be accepted by the Father. And they need to read this passage more carefully. Because then there is no more sacrifice for you. Now with that said, brothers and sisters, hopefully this has been helpful and clear enough. So, be blessed.
Yeah, he's gonna burn it away, the holy furnace ablaze, eternal the day, somebody come on.